Hello class, this is Andy Falls. Laturnia Evans and I will be presenting the Facebook Live murder. Last April 12th in Shreveport, Louisiana, 27-year-old Renita Williams, a Shreveport native and mother of three, was held hostage in her home by former boyfriend 36-year-old Jonathan Robinson. He proceeded to shoot her several times while the entire event was streamed live on social media, as Ms. Williams was forced to apologize to a woman thought to be Mr. Robinson's current girlfriend. A link to the video is available at the end of the presentation. On the morning of April 12th at 10:48 a.m., gunshot fire is reported to police. Police arrive at 1301 Natalie Street at 10:53 a.m. 2 minutes later, officers report being fired upon, and one officer is wounded in the wrist. After a 90-minute standoff with police, Jonathan Robinson finally surrenders and is taken into custody, where he is booked at the Shreveport City Jail. Renita Williams was found in the house with multiple gunshot wounds. It is unclear how long Ms. Williams was left in the house after being shot, as EMS was unable to get her help until after Mr. Robinson surrendered. She was rushed to University Health Hospital, but was pronounced dead on arrival. Later that afternoon, Mr. Robinson was transferred from the city jail to Caddo Correctional Center after vandalizing and flooding his cell at the jail. He is charged with 1 count of second-degree murder, 1 count of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, 7 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of simple criminal damage to property. At the preliminary arraignment the following day, bond is set at $2.5 million. $750,000 for the second-degree murder charge and $250,000 for each attempted first-degree murder charge. On April 27th, Mr. Robinson's attorney files a motion requesting a preliminary examination prior to the case going to the grand jury. On May 29th, the preliminary hearing is held, where Sergeant Jeff Brown testifies that Mr. Robinson told him he woke up that morning with the intent to kill Renita Williams and have a shootout with the police, and he did just that. The case is held over for trial. On June 13th, after hearing testimony about Robinson breaking into the victim's house, holding her captive, and then shooting at police officers during the standoff, the grand jury indicted Jonathan Robinson on upgraded charges of first-degree murder, as well as 7 counts of attempted first-degree murder and 1 count of criminal destruction of property. 6 days later, Caddo Parish District Attorney James Stewart announces he will seek the death penalty in this case. At the formal arraignment on July 31st, Mr. Robinson's court-appointed public defendant enters a plea of not guilty for his client. Mr. Robinson objects to the entry of a not guilty plea. On September 17th, during a preliminary hearing, Mr. Robinson again tries to plead guilty. However, in Louisiana, a person can't plead guilty to a death sentence. As of September 17th, the trial is postponed, awaiting an attorney qualified to represent a defendant facing the death penalty. Representatives of Louisiana's Public Defender Board say Robinson is second in line on a waiting list for an attorney qualified in death penalty cases. Until then, justice for Renita Williams also remains on hold. So this brings us to the question, why would Jonathan Robinson do this? Apparently, Jonathan Robinson had been romantically seeing both Renita Williams and Rika Taylor. Ms. Williams had supposedly posted something on Facebook referring to this days before the attack. On the morning of April 12th, Jonathan Robinson came to the home of Renita Williams. After he kicked in her front door, he held her hostage and forced her to go live on Facebook and apologize to his new girlfriend. In the video, Mr. Robinson can be seen pacing back and forth behind Ms. Williams while he screams obscenities and points a rifle at her. Mr. Robinson has a long, violent criminal history. Police say mugshots of Jonathan Robinson can fill a photo album. In 2000, at the age of 18, Jonathan Robinson is charged with armed robbery. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison and was paroled after 2. In 2003, Robinson was arrested for shooting a man in the leg in a drive-by shooting, but those charges were dismissed. 8 months later, Robinson was arrested again for shooting a different man in the leg due to a long-running dispute. He pled guilty to a lesser charge of battery and served 7 years in prison. In 2015, Mr. Robinson's first case of domestic violence was recorded. He pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge of domestic abuse battery and is sentenced to a year probation. In 2016, he violated his probation and went to jail for 60 days. Later that year, Mr. Robinson is again charged with armed robbery, but charges are dismissed. As noted previously, the murder of Renita Williams wasn't the first time Mr. Robinson attacked a woman. On May 24, 2015, Mr. Robinson rammed the car of his longtime girlfriend while she was driving and then followed her home. When witnesses called police to the house, officers found Mr. Robinson beating the woman who was screaming for help. Police reports state that Mr. Robinson used his girlfriend as a human shield and told police he was armed. Officers got the woman away from him and had to use tasers to get him under control. He is charged with simple assault, false imprisonment, domestic abuse, aggravated assault, domestic abuse battery, and resisting an officer. Mr. Robinson pled guilty to misdemeanor domestic abuse battery and receives a year of probation. All other charges are dropped. 3 months later, he assaulted the same woman again. For violating his probation, he went to jail for 60 days. Prosecutors say his sentence for the first incident could have been greater, but the victim was unwilling to cooperate. Renita Williams experienced a similar incident less than a year before she was killed. In August 2017, Ms. Williams reported that Mr. Robinson grabbed her by the throat as she was sitting in her vehicle. Ms. Williams had red marks on her neck when police arrived, but by then she didn't want to press charges. The case was closed without an arrest. The framework of victimization we chose for this case is battered woman syndrome. The term was first coined in 1979 as a way to describe the effects of intimate partner violence on the victims. Most abusive relationships have a clearly discernible cycle consisting of 3 phases. During the first phase, in an attempt to reduce anxiety and tension, the abuser inflicts verbal or minor physical abuse. The victim responds by placating the abuser to avoid a severely abusive episode. As the tension grows, the phase is followed by an acute episode where the victim is subject to severe physical and verbal abuse, which may include significant injury and threats of death. At the end of the incident, there is a sharp, predictable reduction in tension. The final phase of the cycle is loving attrition, during which the abuser becomes remorseful, apologetic, and loving. During this time, the abuser assures the victim the abusive incident will not be repeated. The honeymoon phase reinforces the victim's commitment to the relationship. This phase invariably fades as the tension mounts and the cycle begins again. To qualify for battered woman syndrome, the victim must have gone through the cycle at least twice. Renita Williams had gone through the cycle with Jonathan Robinson on multiple occasions. Relatives of Miss Williams stated Mr. Robinson had been abusive and violent with Miss Williams numerous times. In addition to the cycle of abuse, victims of intimate partner violence often undergo an undermining of a sense of self through psychological abuse. This leads to feelings of unworthiness and inadequacy. The constant negative depictions of the victim are unable to be disputed by positive interactions with others outside of the relationship, often due to enforced social isolation. There are many factors that make it difficult to respond and end intimate partner violence. First, discussions often focus on issues related to the victims rather than the perpetrators. Many ask why the victim stays, when they should be asking why the abuser hits the victim. Additionally, with regard to violence, there's still a preoccupation with stranger danger despite evidence that shows individuals are more likely to be harmed or killed by someone they know. An inadvertent consequence of this reinforces the hidden nature of violence among intimate partners. These relationships live in a private zone, making witnesses reluctant to intervene. Institutions within society often support violence through historical interpretations, customs, and social mores. Intimate partner violence is a significant issue with implications for public health, criminal justice, and healthcare. It is pervasive and affects many relationships and families. There are a number of theories that may be attributed to the cause of violence. In social learning theory, learning occurs in a social context and through the observation of others. Individuals gain knowledge and learn behaviors from watching others. Witnessing and experiencing violence can send the message that violence is an appropriate tactic for settling conflict. Mr. Robinson was exposed to violence and experienced violence. Also, he spent almost a decade in prison where he was housed with other violent offenders. Another possibility is Mr. Robinson lacks impulse control. He was unable to exert self-control and acted on an urge. Poor impulse control makes an individual more likely to resort to violence as a means of getting one's way. Mr. Robinson may also struggle with affect regulation. When individuals are unable to control and moderate their emotions, They are more likely to resort to violence in times of stress. Also, many perpetrators of intimate partner violence often have some underlying mental illness, such as antisocial or borderline personality disorders, as well as substance abuse issues. There are a number of potential roles for the forensic nurse in this case. First, in death investigation. The forensic nurse has knowledge and understanding of disease processes and is qualified to work with a medical examiner. They also are uniquely qualified to interact with family members involved in stressful events, such as the violent death of a loved one. The forensic nurse may also work within the correctional system. This role positions nurses to create and manage a closed healthcare system in which they can identify and treat high-risk patients, monitor their care, both physical and mental, and support lifestyle changes with skill and knowledge. Advanced nursing care can be a powerful change agent in correctional settings and has the potential to positively impact the general health of the community. Finally, forensic nurse leaders can assume power and influence, and in these positions can affect decision-making bodies throughout the nursing profession and make policy at the local, state, national, and international levels. By raising the awareness of important issues, there is potential to affect public policy. The possibilities of this role are endless. For those of you who are interested in seeing the video of Renita Williams, here is a link to the video. L'Attorney and I came up with the following discussion questions. First, being that this crime occurred on Facebook Live, what are your thoughts on social media contributing to the spread and glorification of violence? Second, as an advanced practice forensic nurse, what issue would you take from this case to publicly address and work to change policy? Why is this issue important, and what are some steps that could be taken to bring about this change? We look forward to an engaging week of discussion. Thank you for watching our presentation. We hope you found it interesting, and here's a list of the references we used. Please let us know if there are any questions. Thank you.